Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. This one's a little bit more nerve-wracking than usual because I know for a fact that other people from the Indie Accords Readathon, where I got this review copy, will be watching this. So, hi everybody! Now, today I am reviewing The Legend of Black Jack by AR Witham. This is a YA portal fantasy all about a young boy named Jack who ends up in a magical realm far away from his own because they need a doctor. Just one problem, he's not a doctor, but he has enough medical knowledge with his eidetic memory that he can make it work. And by being brought through to this world, he also ends up in a fantasy war. Because of course he did. Big, bad, evil prince is doing the evil magics. But over the course of his time in this world, people begin to assume that he is this mythical man known as Black Jack. Now, the synopsis, the blurb, the marketing, all of that kind of stuff really emphasizes the myth of this man to the extent that I wasn't really sure what this book actually was genre-wise at first. But basically, he was this ye olde times character that was said to have done all of these fantastical things. And you get the gist very early on that even for a world that has literal magic, the things that he is said to have done in the life he is said to have lived is very likely exaggerations over time, over retellings. But Jack, through just having 21st century knowledge in a world that is considered primitive, looks otherworldly, and therefore they assume, oh, this must be the return of Black Jack. It helps that Black Jack traditionally wore a black scarf across his face. That's how he got the moniker. So they're like, oh, well, clearly this is it, even though it's a scrawny 14-year-old kid. And I liked that idea because it kind of serves as a theme for the book of coming into your own and picking up a mantle and that kind of thing. Because a lot of the talk around Black Jack isn't so much of the man, more the ideas of what the man stood for, fighting evil and being humble and giving to others and generosity, that kind of stuff. So it's him basically being forced with this idea and having to decide whether or not he's willing to continue the lie and try to live up to those standards or not. And I really like that idea. There's a great rite of passage scene late in the game that does so many feels, gives so many feels. But the way I heard this book described a lot in reviews, and I would agree with them, is that it's very classic. It's a classic action adventure fantasy story. That being said, this is my biggest issue with the book, and the reason that it didn't get to 5 stars is it's so classic that it has a lot of the same problems that a lot of classic fantasy did. First and foremost, it has very poor representation of foster care. You may know if you follow my channel for a hot second, I am a foster parent, and I've had many issues with the way that foster parenting or the foster system in general is portrayed. Yes, there are problems with it. Yes, bad things happen within it, but the cartoonishly evil way that this book in particular dealt with it was mind-boggling because there didn't seem to be any point to it. He ends up at one point in this foster home in our world, in Chicago actually, where he is like one of 14 kids in the house, and there's only 3 bedrooms, and the woman is horrifically abusive, and there are drunk men coming through constantly, and at one point he even states that he asks his social worker to leave, like tells his social worker that all this is going on, and basically it's like, nah, whatever, sucks to suck. Like, and there's no point to it because this abuse, this neglect is never part of his character arc at all. He has a separate character arc, and I can't really get into what it is because spoilers, but like, he never has to overcome that abuse or neglect. It doesn't even really seem to bother him. In fact, throughout the story, a big point is that he wants to go home. He wants to go home so bad. He wants to go back to Chicago. But the problem is, why? Why would he want to? He has all these friends. He has a father figure and like all of these people he's close to in this world. Yet I'm supposed to believe that it's like a big decision for him to choose whether to stay or go back home, when back home is objectively a horribly abusive environment. It, like, that kind of thing. Like, you could have made the foster care representation way more realistic and had it not be that horrible, and his arc would have been functionally the same. It's just, after having foster kids that couldn't believe, like, literally did not know they were in the foster system because they were expecting, like, a literal hellhole, and the fact that, like, they got blanket forts and snacks at my house made them assume that my house couldn't be foster care because that's the extent of how horrible they assumed it was going to be. Seeing that play out in a book for no apparent reason, not the biggest fan. The second thing was there is exactly in this giant ensemble cast, you know, you're fighting the big bad, you need an army. There is one woman, a single female character in the main cast. There are occasionally like side characters that come through. There's a woman that ends up being a semi-big leader in like the big battle, but she's literally not even given a name until like the scene before the big battle. So we have exactly one female character, and she's the protagonist's crush, and she ends up kidnapped at one point and has to be saved. That is definitely classic fantasy, but not in the good way. So I think this is supposed to be the beginning of a series. Just gonna throw this out there. Maybe moving forward, we include more than a single main female character in our ensemble cast. And then the third one, and I know for a fact this is something that the author did not intend. Honestly, I don't think the author intended any of these. I honestly think that he was intending to go for a classic fantasy style and just did not investigate internally some of the darker aspects of that classic fantasy style. But Jack Swift, our protagonist, is white. Every character of color comes from this high fantasy land, and then the narrative makes a giant point of telling you how primitive this fantasy land is. How much they don't understand science and think it's just another kind of magic, and they don't even understand germ theory, and not the greatest. Again, I don't think he intended anything by this. I think it was just such a clear homage to classic fantasy that we went a little bit too far and included the things from classic fantasy that we really should have pulled back on. But regardless, now that we've gotten all of the not fun stuff out of the way, what did I like? It was actually a lot. I loved the writing style. It flowed very well. The audiobook I listened to, because yes, I can actually listen to more books on audio now. Still not a lot. It was still an issue. I cannot get myself to focus. The narration was very well done. No fault of the author, but I always struggle to remember names when I'm doing audiobooks, especially high fantasy names. So for the longest time in my mind, it was like, okay, Minotaur dude, cat dude, lizard dude, pirate dude. They were just, their names in my head were like generic descriptions of their basic archetypes. And the characters did feel distinct enough that I could give them like, not necessarily like character stereotypes, but I could give them like, okay, it's this dude, and work from there. And I really liked that. They were all very distinct. The author actually narrates the audiobook himself, which is not the first time I've listened to an audiobook narrated by the actual author, but he definitely came across very polished, a bunch of different voices for all of the different characters, some light accents, not deep accents, but I did like how he modulated his voice for almost every character, and it came across really well. The plot, I was a little bit afraid that it was going to be rambly or like the wheels were spinning, because for a long part in this center, the second third, it felt like they were kind of just like bouncing from point to point and getting a new objective every 20 pages. However, thankfully, it does all come up together at the end before I love a good pre-final battle. I love that moment when like you're about to go in and do the thing, and suddenly like, characters that you met 200 pages ago show back up because of the kindness that you showed them earlier. Like, I love that kind of stuff. I love that kind of, you thought this part was pointless, but no, look, they're back. I really liked that part. And I will give him credit. As much as it seemed like it was wheel spinning, not really going anywhere for a section there, everything did get wrapped up. The battle was nice and gigantic. Again, if you've been around my channel for a hot second, you know I am a stickler for endings. If you're gonna give me a battle, I want a battle. I want explosions. I want death. That sounds weird to say, but I am of the mindset of, if you're going to show me a giant war, I want it to actually feel like a war, and people don't come across like wars on the other side the same people they were before. Something happens, you are changed after that. And there was a lot of change. There was a lot of like the world felt fundamentally different at the end of the book versus the beginning, which is what you always want. And for the plot points themselves, there was one big reveal at the end that I guessed from like the second chapter. Now, I have never held it against a book that I can guess the reveal. Because in my mind, to have a proper reveal, you have to have given clues so that it makes sense. So I will never hold it against a book, and I won't even hold it against this book that I guessed it so early, because this is a book that is actually written to be YA, which is something so rare in the modern bookish world. It feels like so much of YA is basically grown adults pretending to be teenagers and secretly written for adults, that having a book that is very clearly meant to be for teenagers, I'll give it a pass. It's meant for people half my age. If I can guess the reveal from the near beginning, that doesn't mean that its intended audience will. And I've talked to other people from the readathon that also read it that were surprised by it, and I think they're adults, so I don't know how close they are to my age, but I did enjoy it. I did like that part. Like, even when I knew the reveal was coming, I knew I was gonna like the reveal. He did get me, though. The author did get me with a fake out. He got a message, like so many of my indie authors have. How fucking dare you? Which at this point, most of the indie authors I work with understand that is a compliment. If I send you the how fucking dare you in all caps, you should take that as a job well done. Good job. Because he got me. I thought a thing had happened and I was like, no! And then the thing didn't happen. Well, it kind of happened. It's a whole thing. But the plot from the final third on was great. The journey through the Juts, it felt like a giant trek. It felt like a giant task was upon them and the world was on their shoulders, and it genuinely felt like they might not make it. Some people might not live. Like, I liked that aspect of it a lot. And then the very, very ending was a little bit upsetting for me because it felt like, I'm gonna sound like a psychopath, it felt a little bit too happy. Like, everything was just a little bit too good, mostly involving injuries. It felt like, no, I wanted a few more people to still be seriously injured as a result of the battle, but like, it did kind of match with the themes they'd been talking about throughout the course of the story. And it's a YA book. We don't need to make them all depressed. You know, teenagers have enough to be depressed about in this modern world. So, like, fine. We can have it be super, super happy. And then I also did enjoy, just side note here, completely random side note, the scenes where they were in Chicago. I actually recognized part of it because I've been to Chicago. I live in the Midwest, like a 3.5 hour drive from Chicago, not even. So I really liked that. And then for the characters, my particular favorite was probably Ricker Flynn. I love a good immoral but sassy pirate. Just chef's kiss. Loved his voice. He had like a low key, I think it was supposed to be Irish accent. It wasn't very pronounced. But he's that kind of immoral, I'm here for the treasure. I'm just here for the treasure. And like, Jack has to kind of like trick him into sticking together, and then I always love it when the morally gray character finally begrudgingly gets the conscience. It's one of my favorite tropes. But there were other aspects, the Minotaur with the obsession with honor, and the little Tam, the little lizard that he teaches sign language to. I loved the voice in the narration for the little lizard. It was so cute. But in general, the last 100 pages were definitely the highlight for me, and I am such a big stickler for endings. And honestly, if it wasn't for how awesome this last ending bit was, this book probably could have ended up 3 stars, but I'm a sucker for a good ending, and he pulled it out. Moving forward, there are some references, some slight nudges in the narrative that imply that this is going to become a series, but moving forward, if this does come back, I would just be like, maybe we, you know, fun to pay homage to classic fantasy, but like maybe also we grow a little bit beyond it to really focus on the happier parts of classic fantasy and not the darker problematic aspects of it. But regardless, I gave this book 4 stars. I definitely think that the next in the series could be 5 if things go a certain way, and so I'm definitely intrigued to continue. If you would like to send me a copy of that, Mr. Witham, I am all for that. Now, if you are an indie author and you're interested in a review like this one, you can contact me by email. I'll have all of that information down in the description below. Please be sure to give my review policy a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.